Welcome to the Play Podcast with me, Douglas Schatz. Hello, and welcome to episode 104 of the Play Podcast, where we explore the greatest new and classic plays. I'm Douglas Schatz, founder and host of the Play Podcast. The curtain rises on the maritime land of Illyria. Its ruler, the Duke Orsino, is restless, tormented by his infatuation with the Countess Olivia, for his passion is unrequited. Olivia is grieving for the death of her brother and will not allow Orsino to see her, vowing to remain veiled in mourning for 7 years. But Olivia's solemn promise is soon to be tested, for a charismatic young man is sent to assail her with Orsino's petition of love, and his proxy appeal disarms Olivia's defenses. She falls for the messenger, not the Lord. Not all is as it seems in Illyria, however, as this mysterious messenger has a secret identity that beguiles both Olivia and his master Orsino, and propels an unexpected romantic merry-go-round. This is William Shakespeare's charming and unruly romantic comedy, Twelfth Night, or What You Will. It is one of Shakespeare's most popular comedies, renowned for its clever cross-dressing plot and festive hi-jinks, but also for its elusive tone, fluctuating between the comic and a darker melancholy, as well as for its open rendition of fluid gender and desire. As we record this episode, a new production of the play, which highlights the mix of the carnival and the sober, the joy and the woe, is playing at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre in London. And I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast the Globe's Director of Education, Dr. Will Tosh. Will has worked at Shakespeare's Globe since 2014 and is responsible for dramaturgy, events for both students and adult learners, and for the Globe's scholarly research program. He is the host of That Is the Question, the Globe's award-winning YouTube series. He's also the author of 3 books, Playing Indoors, Staging Early Modern Drama in the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse, Male Friendship and Testimonies of Love in Shakespeare's England, and most recently, Straight Acting, The Many Queer Lives of William Shakespeare. Welcome to the Play Podcast, Will. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Douglas. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So my first question is, where does Twelfth Night, or What You Will, fit into the chronology and evolution of Shakespeare as a playwright?
So it comes at a really interesting point. Sometimes said that Twelfth Night is the final straightforward comedy that Shakespeare writes. Now, I would query whether Twelfth Night is a straightforward comedy. It's certainly not uninterrupted by other veins, and I'm sure we'll come on to them. But it's true that it's the sort of final entry in a run of what are sometimes referred to, or used to be referred to, as festive comedies. So if we think of things like Midsummer Night's Dream, As You Like It, those sort of rather giddy, usually romantic-driven comedies that often involve disguise or confusion, and things are resolved at the end. And Twelfth Night sits at the end of that cycle. It's written probably very late 1601, start of 1602. And interestingly, it's followed by a fairly uninterrupted line of tragedies. So that you get into kind of Lear and Othello, and so it sort of sits at a kind of hinge point in Shakespeare's writing career. It's sort of more or less bang in the middle. If you think about his writing life from the, let's say the late 1580s up to 1612, 1613, something like that. Twelfth Night, which gets an early performance in February 1602, so it's probably written about that sort of time, a little bit before. So we can absolutely think about it as a sort of bridging play between early and late career.
I've heard it called his last romantic comedy and his first dark comedy, where such things as Measure for Measure and All's Well That Ends Well follows. But also, I guess it's around the time that he wrote Hamlet, is it not? And also, I don't know whether the plot with the twins had anything to do with the death of his son, Hamnet. Is that close to that?
Any and all of those ideas and suppositions are valid. It's fascinating that one of the very early audience members at Twelfth Night, who sees it at Middle Temple Hall in 1602, a law student called John Manningham, writes about the play and actually compares it to a much earlier twin caper comedy by Shakespeare. He compares it in his diary review to the Comedy of Errors. So there is clearly something thematic that even viewers at the time were picking up when it comes to Shakespeare's interest in the comedic potentiality of twins. And of course, Shakespeare himself had twins, Judith and Hamlet had died, 5-6 years before Twelfth Night was written. So without question, it is not humanly possible for a writer like Shakespeare to write a play that features one of the most moving reunion scenes he ever writes between a female and a male twin, and for him not to be thinking at some level about his own children.
Speaking of twins, I'd like to ask you about the title of the play, because there are 2 parts to it. Its full title is Twelfth Night, or What You Will. Can you tell us a bit about what each part of the title signifies?
This 2-part title is so fascinating because there are a couple of Shakespeare plays that bear alternate titles, and alternate titles are not uncommon. Henry VIII, one of his last plays, has an additional title of All Is True. Plenty of his plays get renamed when they're published. Twelfth Night, or What You Will, appears to own that alternate title from the very beginning. So this John Mannigan, who I've mentioned already, writes in his very scrappy diary. He says, "Last night at our feast we had a play called Twelfth Night, or What You Will." And Twelfth Night, or What You Will is what the play is called in the catalogue list at the start of the first folio, which is the earliest printed text of this play.
I think you said at the talk I attended the other day that it's important to say that the second half of this title is not a subtitle. It has always been an equal part of the full title of the play, and they both have significance.
Well, that's right, and it's unusual. And I think it links to the fact that Twelfth Night is itself, of course, a very season-specific name. Twelfth Night is one of the days of Christmas. This play has nothing to do with Christmas. I mean, Shakespeare likes seasonal names, Midsummer Night's Dream, Winter's Tale, and in both of those plays there is some association between the title and the season in which the story takes place, or a kind of citation or reference of the title in the play itself. That's not the case with Twelfth Night, and I think there's a logic to the subtitle. The titling potentially relates to the play being an occasional play for a Christmas court festivity, which is completely plausible. And What You Will is, in a sense, more what the play is about, because there is such a lot about human desires, about what desires are licit and illicit, what desires are supported and encouraged, and which desires are castigated and punished. What You Will seems like it sounds very permissive, and in many ways it is, and lots of contemporary productions have taken that permissive line. But Shakespeare's culture was not a permissive society, and although there were times in the year, particularly festive times, when some of those very strict hierarchies were upended, they were upended in a fairly constrained and deliberate way. It wasn't a sort of free-for-all. So What You Will as a kind of offer within the play is both full of potential, but also a little bit ambiguous in terms of what it actually means.
So it's interesting you mentioned about Twelfth Night not being specifically referenced, but I guess there is a sense that he's pointing towards a festive season or festive events. It may be deliberately vaguely he does that, but there's definitely a sense that some of these characters seem to be on a non-stop party.
Well, on a non-stop bender, and I think one of the key points of festivity is that society agrees that the date is to be held a holiday, and we all decide that we'll take off time from work, or we'll party, or we'll feast. Twelfth Night is unusual because different characters have different views about whether the time is a holiday or not. So Olivia is very clear that this is not a holiday time. She's in mourning for her brother and her father.
Yeah.
Orsino is far too caught up in his own emotional narcissism to care whether it's a holiday or not. It's really only Toby Belch and potentially Feste and the crowd around him who've decided this is a holiday. And they've kind of done that unilaterally. It doesn't seem to be any culturally recognised holiday. It's just them going on the lash all the time.
Okay. Well, I may have read too much into this connection with festivals then, because festivals, of course, are generally, as you've suggested, occasions where normal rules may not apply. And some medieval festivals included dressing up, for example, servants dressing up as their masters, so swapping social positions even. It may be it's a time of license to misbehave, and I guess that sort of connects to What You Will, right? People are given license to let their hair down, to do what they want. What you will literally meaning desire, as you've said. So you can do what you want or be who you want to be, that in some sense anything goes, including potentially sexual license, for example. And I also thought there was that sense of making the most of it while you can. That, of course, this Twelfth Night, there's a sort of limit to it, isn't there? It's the last day of the Christmas festivities, so this is going to stop, or should stop at some point. So there's a line about enjoying present mirth and present laughter, as Festy the Fool has it, which we still remember, of course.
Thank you, Noel Coward.
Yes, indeed. But as you say, there's another side to it. In What You Will, nothing is really very certain. They can make what they like of their lives and the world. And there's certainly a sense, I think, of lack of resolution or certainty or chaos going on. Or maybe even Shakespeare had this idea that it's slightly throwaway. I mean, this is just a little whatever you will it to be, this play. But finally, or even primarily, is it not essentially an invitation to us as the audience to make of the play what we will?
It's so interesting you say that, because I think that's one of the reasons why this play and all of Shakespeare's work has survived and thrived to the extent that it has, because there is within it a kind of inherent permissiveness to take it in a direction that speaks to the time and speaks to the culture. What's interesting about the story of Twelfth Night is that it's not a dashed off whimsical thing that you can take or leave as you. It's one of the most effectively structured dramas. The care that, of course, Shakespeare has taken to make the play work at a level of engineering is mind-blowing. So there's obviously a kind of deliberate disingenuity to giving the play also the air of, oh, what you will. It's just a little trifle. It really isn't. It's this incredibly complex beast. And if you think about the kind of journey of some of those characters, or rather who they end up with, so particularly, let's say, the four central lovers, and Malvolio, let's chuck Malvolio in there as well, there's a journey there that certainly goes from transgression and confusion and potential chaos to a much more contained space of heterodynastic marriage. But they're both kind of weird marriages. The place that Orsino and Violet end, and the place that Olivia and Sebastian end, are indicative of those characters', I would say, sort of queerly transgressive desires, which on some level we might think society is not super happy about, but actually get accommodated quite securely at the end of that play. The character who's punished most is the one who attempts social escalation, as Malvolio, who overreaches for his romantic target, who is Olivia. And although he's shown some kindness in the final moments of the play, when his punishment is exposed and Olivia acknowledges that he's been badly treated, he sort of justifiably, in my view, marches off saying, I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you. So there's something kind of interesting about the way in which the play closes off its stories, which is not a straightforward, it was chaotic and now we're back to stability and conformism.
No, well, I'm going to interrupt you there because we got a long way to go before we get to the end and the way it closes. I think for listeners who are not as familiar with the play, we probably should give them a brief introduction to the main characters and a summary of the plot. Please don't worry about spoilers at this point, as we're not going to be able to avoid them once we get stuck into this. And even if you're going to see the show at the Globe, sometimes I think a refresher in the plot beforehand can help. At the interval, in fact, when I saw the show the other night, I overheard a lady sitting nearby trying to provide a recap of who everyone was and how they were related to her companion, which proves it's not always that easy to keep track. So I wonder if we could just do the potted version of who these main characters are and what transpires in the course of the play, as briefly as and clearly as we can.
I'll do my best. Let's start with Orsino and Olivia. So these are the two resident aristocrats of Illyria. Orsino, who is a duke, and Olivia is, in her own right, a countess, very rich aristocratic family. Olivia is in mourning for her brother and also her father. Orsino harbours a rather kind of self-indulgent desire for Olivia, which is really based in a romantic idea of what love for another rich person is, and he spouts lots of love poetry, which is supposed to sound a bit vapid, so we're not convinced by Orsino's love. So Orsino and the situation with Olivia is introduced to us first in the first scene.
He may also harbor interests in her assets as well, neighboring estate.
Who wouldn't?
But he proclaims to be deeply in love.
He does. We then cut to the other main character in the play, who is a shipwrecked gentlewoman whose name we only actually later discover is Viola. We discover that she and her twin brother Sebastian, they've been shipwrecked, and Viola has ended up on the coast of Illyria, where she is informed that Orsino is the local duke. She's heard of him, she knows who he is. She decides that for her own safety and security, she will dress herself as a boy. In fact, she says she'll dress as a eunuch, which is an idea that swiftly gets forgotten. But she'll dress as a boy and go and seek service with Orsino.
She believes her brother Sebastian has been drowned as well,
And
right?
she believes her brother has been drowned in the shipwreck. Yes. She enters service with Orsino, who we learn quite quickly begins to harbour a bit of a tendresse for this bewitchingly pretty young man who seems to be very happy to do his bidding. And he decides to send Viola as an emissary to Olivia to prosecute his case for Olivia's hand.
Viola has now taken on the name of Cesario as a young man in disguise.
Exactly, and the favours that Cesario receives at Orsino's hands cause jealousy amongst Orsino's household. Viola, as Cesario, marches off to Olivia's house, where Olivia breaks her customary rule of always rejecting Orsino's embassies, welcomes Cesario in, and herself falls in love with him/her. That drama develops. We'll bring in the third element of both the cast list and the plot lines here, which is Olivia's household. And Olivia, as an aristocratic landowner, has a sprawling household of servants and hangers-on, including her uncle, Sir Toby Belch, in our production at the Globe, regendered as Lady Belch, Belch's foolish friend and money stool pigeon, Andrew Aguecheek, the household clown, Feste, Olivia's gentlewoman, Maria, and other household servants such as Fabian and others, as well as the household steward, who is called Malvolio. And Malvolio, unlike the other rather drunken and chaotic members of the household, is a stickler for routine and for order, is characterised by others on stage as a Puritan, and although he appears to be an absolute fun sponge in every scene that he appears, it then becomes apparent that he's in love with Olivia himself.
He may be in love, or he may just aspire to be her partner.
Absolutely. So as the plot develops, Malvolio offends Sir Toby Belcher, Maria and Aguecheek by interrupting their midnight party and threatening them with expulsion. So in revenge, Maria and Belch and Aguecheek decide to make Malvolio believe that Olivia is also in love with him by dropping a letter in his path that makes elusive reference to both himself and to Olivia, leading to one of the great set pieces of English comic theatre when Malvolio finds this letter in the garden, helpfully reads out to us in the audience, while his tormentors are hidden in the box tree and other bits of garden furniture behind him, occasionally popping up to pass comment or threaten violence on him.
Yeah.
He does what the letter instructs him to do, which is to approach Olivia with great romantic intent while wearing yellow stockings that are also cross-gartered, so the laces are crossed around his calves, and smiling a great deal, which is not a behaviour that comes naturally to Malvolio. Olivia is shocked, thinks perhaps he's gone mad, commits him to the not very tender ministrations of Belch and Feste and Maria, who torment him, keep him in a prison, and mistreat him very badly. And it's a really interesting point. I suppose we started by thinking about the way in which this play is or isn't a straightforward comedy. It's very much not a straightforward comedy when it comes to the line of Malvolio's treatment, which really tips into something quite extreme. While all that's happening, the Olivia Orsino Viola/Cesario plot gains in complexity with the arrival in Illyria of Viola's twin brother Sebastian, who was not drowned, but was himself saved from the waves by a sea captain called Antonio, who is himself deeply in love with Sebastian. So they both arrive in Illyria. There are various moments of mistaken identity involving either Viola/Cesario or Sebastian. Eventually, Olivia manages to sort of lasso Sebastian into both her bed, it is heavily implied, and also into marriage. So without Sebastian really knowing what's going on, he's ended up married to Olivia.
Olivia had fallen deeply for Cesario and has been courting him. And eventually there's a substitution between Cesario and Sebastian, unbeknownst to Sebastian or Olivia, and Olivia marries Sebastian, as you say.
Exactly. All of this is then kind of ultimately resolved in the final scene of the play, where both twins appear on stage for the first time at the same time. Orsino realizes what is going on, that the young man, Cesario, who he's been developing and harboring these kind of powerful feelings, which express themselves very clearly in the play, is in fact a woman. And Olivia realizes that the compelling young man she's fallen in love with is a woman as well, but it's okay because she's married the male version of the thing that she fell in love with. There's a wonderful moment when everyone on stage realizes that there's two of them, Viola and Sebastian, and Olivia just says, "Most wonderful."
Yeah, that is one of the great lines in theatre.
And of course, modern actors love that because they've got so much freedom to imagine what's going through Olivia's head at that moment about what she could do.
Yeah, so she's going, most wonderful, how extraordinary that the brother has been saved. Isn't this lovely? But actually, there's obviously a very strong meaning that, oh my God, there's two of them. I could have twice the fun.
Exactly. And within, the, as it were, the kind of happy ending structure of Orsino and Viola ending up as a couple and Olivia and Sebastian ending up as a couple, some left out people include Antonio, who is given quite a lot of stage time to articulate his own feelings of despair and frustration and disappointment that he's been kind of left out of that ending.
Because of his attachment to Sebastian.
Because of his love for Sebastian.
Yeah, that's great. You've done an amazing job. That's fantastic.
Right.
Because as you said earlier, I hope listeners have got some idea of how complex the plotting is, given the twins that move in and out at various points and the reactions to them. And of course, ultimately is able to resolve the romantic triangle of Orsino, Viola, Cesario, and Olivia, 3 into 4, Sebastian replacing Cesario, and Viola emerging from her disguise to be able to marry Orsino. Visually and dramatically, as you've said, it's a great moment when they appear on stage together, dressed identically. Not only a brilliant coup in terms of the plot, as we've said, and as the other characters try to make sense of what they see, the implications of it, of what's been going on when Viola was in disguise. It's, as you say, most wonderful. I also wanted to ask you about the pacing and timescale of the play. The pacing seems quite variable at times. There are times when there are short scenes that fly by, and then there are languorous kind of intervals when, for example, Orsino lounges, indulging in his unrequited love while a song is sung. And other extended scenes where things are quite drawn out, like Malvolio's deciphering of the letter takes some time. There's a fake duel that's set up between Aguchic and Cesario, and the baiting of Malvolio in his dark confinement. But then in the last act, everything seems to speed up. It's very busy towards the resolution of all these strands of the plot. And I was going to ask you about the time scale, because it's slightly confusing references in the play, aren't there? There are a couple of references to the fact that Viola gains Orsino's favor and falls in love with him within 3 days. But then later on in Act 5, Orsino says that Cesario has served him for 3 months. And it feels like a very fast 3 months at that point. It feels like it's only been 3 days. And Antonio, as you said, says that he and Sebastian have been together at one point, he says, for 3 months, though Sebastian only reaches the city that day. So does that mean, I assume, that they have been together for 3 months in Illyria since the shipwreck? What's going on? What is the time scale here?
So it's not unusual for Shakespeare's plays to have what used to be called a double time.
Okay.
Almost a kind of time syncopation. So there's the stage time of the drama. I don't literally mean 2.5 hours, but the time it takes for relationships to develop, for plot points to unfold, for things to kind of broadly hang together. And then there's the deep time of the world that these people are in, with the backstory of their relationships and things like that. A famous example is Othello, which on the surface appears to take really a matter of days, if that. The point from where the play starts, and then they relocate to Cyprus, and then it all kind of unravels really quickly. But we're told throughout the play that the characters have been living together for a long time, allowing, at least to be planted in Othello's mind, the idea that his wife has been repeatedly unfaithful with Cassio. So there sort of needs to be both. It needs to be both the quick time on stage and also the deep time where things might have happened. And something similar is happening in Twelfth Night. There is the sort of, as it were, active time where Viola is shunted back and forth between Olivia and Orsino's house, and Malvolio offends Belch and gets mistreated in return. But then there's also the kind of deep relationship building time where Orsino and Viola can develop their relationship, where Olivia can fall in love with Viola. And also there's a plot necessity that when Sebastian comes in midway through the play with Antonio, Antonio can say, we've been together for 3 months, day and night, no interim, no vacancy. We've been at each other's side. But of course, that also means that in the final act, when Orsino says to Antonio, when did you arrive? And he says, yesterday or today. And Orsino can say, well, that's ridiculous because this boy has been with me for 3 months.
Yes.
So you need that to prove that Antonio is mistaken about Cesario. We're quite hung up about realism and plausibility. There are both of those things in this play. You know, in many ways, it's emotionally a highly realistic play. There is plausibility just within the plotting, but there's also this double time syncopation about what's happening on stage and what is required in the sort of deep time to make the unfolding of the story work.
And I guess the compression is, in a sense, a dramatic convention, but it also heightens the intensity of it all as well, of course.
I think it's in part to do as well with the nature of the sources that Shakespeare's using. So Shakespeare's drawing on a kind of novelistic source for this story, which, of course, as prose fiction can elaborate in great lengths of time if it needs to. So that's one of the effects or the consequences of dramatizing prose fictions, is that you get these sorts of strange, lingering signs that the story existed in some previous form.
And there's stuff that's going on in between scenes, and time is actually moving differently behind the scenes. So what about the setting of the play? We've set in this dukedom of Illyria. So where is Illyria, and why did Shakespeare choose that as a setting?
So geographically, Illyria is the Dalmatian coast. It's effectively Croatia. It was the name of a Roman province, still understood to be a district of the Ottoman Empire by this point.
So why does he put it there? Because actually, in all sorts of other ways, there's really not much character to this place. And in fact, you could also still just be in England. There is much about the characters and the setting of their lives that would be recognizably English to the audience. Belch and his pack haunting pubs, and there's references to particular places south of the river in London. And Orsino and Olivia might just as well be living on neighbouring English estates, as you say. Maybe there's something about setting it abroad that allows for license as well, as we talked about at the beginning.
Oh, I think that's unquestionably true. I mean, I would say that, again, a bit like the double time, there's a kind of double place going on here, which is not just either foreign place and England, but different characters and groups of characters appear to inhabit slightly different versions of those. So I would say that Olivia's household is uncomplicatedly an English household. The way it's structured, the way it's run, seems just to be like an English great house. The Duke's household, I would say, is a bit different because there's a sense of executive rule. He literally rules. So that sense that there's a sort of Central Eastern European quality to the Duke as someone with great power. He has a navy, he's got officers, he's all that sort of stuff. And then Antonio and Sebastian and Viola and her sea captain exist themselves in I suppose, a more kind of romantic, rather novelistic world of European travel, of shipwrecks, not only the kind of novellas that Shakespeare was reading, but a whole heritage of short fiction going back to the Greco-Roman period. And there were quite a lot of romantic stories of disguise and exile and shipwreck and love, and also quite a lot of queer desire, circling in both Latin and Greek and translated modern European languages, which put characters and long-lost siblings and lovers in a range of exotic European locations. So I think all of that is feeding into what the kind of story, the kind of world that Shakespeare's building.
Thinking about where Sebastian or Viola land in Illyria, it's some similarities to the non-specific magical realms of the Isle of the Tempest or the Forest of Arden in Midsummer Night's Dream, where love and things can go on unfettered.
Absolutely. And there's a very strong vein in English literature of this period of the pastoral. You go off into the slightly non-specific countryside where the normal rules don't apply.
Speaking of love unfettered, in an episode of the podcast, we had a general discussion about what makes a great play. And my guest, Mark Lawson, suggested that one of the common ingredients was sex. And I think that we can say that the main characters in this play are driven by desire. Desire is everywhere in the play, isn't it? In all sorts of forms. I mean, it starts from the very beginning with the first line, "If music be the food of love, play on." Orsino is vowing to fully indulge in his desire to the point of excess, he even says. I wanted to ask you about what we see, the forms of that expressed and possibly running underneath what we see in the form of sexual desire in the play.
Well, Mark Lawson is not wrong, I think. And I certainly think that Twelfth Night is furthest, if you like, Shakespeare goes in complicating a play that is dramaturgically structured around sexual desire. That is what's happening in Twelfth Night, and there's just a lot of it. So there's Orsino's desire for Olivia, there's Orsino's desire for the person he thinks is Cesario, there's Orsino's desire, in fact, for Viola, there's Olivia's desire for the person she thinks is Cesario, there's Olivia's desire for the person who turns out to be Sebastian, there's Antonio's desire for Sebastian, there's Sebastian's desire for Antonio, there's Malvolio's desire for Olivia, and all of those are laid over each other. I make it sound very hard to follow, and actually, funny enough, the play isn't particularly hard to follow, but it certainly leans into and enjoys that complexity, ambiguity, fluidity, nuance. And what's interesting, I think, is the form of relationship that each couple ends up articulating. It helps to think about what these characters want at the very start of the play. We're told quite clearly that Orsino wants Olivia. And as you've said, Douglas, there's probably a very good dynastic political reason for that, as much as anything. But given who Orsino is, he articulates that want through the conventions of romantic Petrarchan poetry. So his want might be, I want to make a suitable match and unify our two houses. But the expression for that is, there's this, unreachable beloved who won't have me.
But he also talks of conquering her, being her king, that he will have her essentially and rule her. And you have to think of that as being sexually as well.
Totally. But also, I wonder why Olivia doesn't want that.
I think throughout you get she doesn't fancy him.
I think it's pretty clear. But although, Olivia is without question mourning her brother and her father, she is also, in fact, living in quite an unusual and privileged position as a young woman who is not a widow, who controls her own estate and can make her own decisions. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why she falls in love with Cesario, is that this is a figure of manhood and masculinity who is not mouthing off about control and being her king. He is someone who seems a much more, in some senses, biddable partner. And I would say that what she gets in Sebastian is that. Someone who does what he's told. Sebastian comes into this story and is swept up by Olivia and married to her. Olivia lucks out. She gets a beautiful husband who she's super hot for, who isn't trying to control her. And I suppose that's what I mean by saying that this play, while it has really quite overt transgressive queerness in it, in terms of the embodiment of Cesario as the boy actor playing a woman part, disguised as a boy, generating these desires in all these people on the stage, it even ends up in quite a queer space where the sort of gender hierarchies are inverted in terms of what kind of dynastic marriage, heterosexual marriage, is formed at the end between Olivia and Sebastian, and indeed between Orsino and Viola, which, although has many characteristics of the straightforward, masterful duke taking a wife, carries with it all of that heritage of homoeroticism, which has been so dynamic on stage.
Yes, because Orsino has responded to Cesario, as he thinks, as a boy. It could ultimately be explained by the fact that Cesario was in fact a woman, but Orsino did not know that at the time. And of course, there's this frisson between Olivia and Viola, or Cesario. Again, she thinks he's a man, but she isn't, and yet there's a frisson there as well. There's definitely intimations of homoerotic desire between these couples, before that's in theory resolved, as you say. And also it's interesting you're saying about the relative status or strength between those couples, that I think Viola very much is Orsino's match, if not more. It's not obvious that Orsino's going to command her. It says so literally, but I think what we've seen of Viola is that may not play out in practice. And as you said, Olivia is certainly a powerful figure. I wanted to ask you what the Elizabethan audience would have made of the potential fluidity of sexual desire being intimated throughout. How would these suggestions be viewed in Shakespeare's time?
Well, it's a great question. Look, the short answer is it's quite hard to know. The slightly longer answer is that I think our 21st century assumptions about how society demarcates sexual desire don't necessarily apply in the same way in the early 17th century, which is not to say that this was a time of great queer optimism where anything went. That is absolutely not the case.
It was criminal, right? Sodomy was criminal?
Well, it's a sort of hard thing to call. Yes, the act of sodomy was illegal and was punishable by death. There were almost no prosecutions, let alone convictions, for the act in the years that Shakespeare was writing. In combined reigns of Queen Elizabeth and King James, there are a handful of sodomy cases across the country.
I read the Shakespearean critic Emma Smith suggest that sexual behavior was not necessarily binary in the sense that it didn't necessarily define identity, and there may have been more activity, particularly in the all-male worlds of the Inns of Court you mentioned before, I think, where the play was first aired,
Right.
and the theater itself, which was all-male,
Yeah.
and that these institutions, it's a very patriarchal world, and the bonds that are formed within those institutions, a bit like English public schools through the ages, somehow support the power of the patriarchy to some degree. And all these institutions provide a bit of camouflage for emotional and sexual relationships as well.
I would absolutely agree with Emma, and I see that very much in Twelfth Night. What's interesting is that I suppose our sense of the past is informed by more recent pasts, and we have a habit of Victorianizing the Elizabethan past with a sort of sense of what sexual morality and sexual virtue looked like. I don't think it did look very much like the late 19th century. I think it was highly gendered. Men's space for elite male queer expression was separate to female queer expression, and also sexual desires and sexual expressions in other levels of society. But I do think that it's incredibly important to remember that although law and phobia sat around particular sexual acts like sodomy, other sexual acts or queer sexual activities didn't exist in law. There weren't laws about other things that people could do together. There might well have been disapproval and all sorts of horror from the church, but it didn't sit in legislation. So there's capacity within society for ways in which same-sex desire might have articulated itself are broader than we've perhaps given credit for thus far. And a play like Twelfth Night, I think, shows not that there was an overt toleration or celebration of queer desire, but that it is there as part of the way men and women and men and men and women and women relate to each other in different ways in society. So I think people seeing Twelfth Night for the first time, either at the Inns of Court or at the Globe, would certainly have clocked that something kind of fluid and interesting and creative was going on stage when it comes to the sexuality of the characters.
Well, it's going on all the time in any case by definition, because as you reminded us, all the parts are being played by men as well. So, the ambiguity is there from the start. It can't but resonate. So we've talked about desire. Let's talk a little bit about love, because I think the play is also about the arbitrariness of love. Because as ever in Shakespeare, it's a marvel how quickly people fall in and out of love, isn't it?
Oh, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because we have a very kind of clear sense of what romantic love is, what erotic love is, how it differs to other forms of love. I'm not sure it's entirely as clear in 1602. So Orsino's love for Olivia in the opening scenes of this play is highly artificial, and it encodes something that we probably wouldn't recognize as love. It encodes, as we've talked about already, a desire for Orsino to make a politically and financially advantageous match, a socially suitable match. But he's also using a language which is recognized as an elite form of emotional expression. We see it at the start of Romeo and Juliet as well, we all forget that Romeo's in love with a different girl at the start of that play called Rosaline, and he comes out with these very overboiled phrases about how much he loves her, and using these sorts of tropes of Petrarchan desire, which are all about antithesis, like hot ice and all this sort of nonsense. Once he meets Juliet, he's given a different language and a different register that suggests this is, we would read it as real. Shakespeare's first audience might have read it as like slightly intoxicated. So what love is sits differently depending on who and where and how we're talking about. And I think that the same goes for Olivia and Cesario, for Cesario and Orsino, for Malvolio and Olivia, for Sebastian and Antonio, for Sebastian and Olivia. They're all speaking a slightly different language of love, depending on what they want out of those unions that they find themselves thrust into.
Yeah, it's interesting because Olivia falls for Cesario very fast.
How now, even so quickly, may one catch the plague? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And catching the plague, I thought, was an interesting metaphor.
Yeah.
And it can almost be comic at this pace. But it's very real to her. And it's, I guess, a statement of the power of desire as well. And like the plague, it's not necessarily something she can control. It's just happened to her.
I think it says something about the power of the Messalline twins. So we're told at the very start of the play, in Cesario's first scene in Orsino's court, one of the other jealous courtiers says, "Oh, if the Count continues these favours towards you, you're like to be much advanced," suggesting that it's been an accrual of favour. Olivia sees Cesario for the first time and falls in love with him. We're told later that Antonio fell in love with Sebastian when he saw him drowning in the sea. That fast.
These are very attractive people.
No one looks their best when drowning in the sea, but these two do.
No, but these two do. I mean, there are some hints about how pretty they are, I think. I love the scenes, though, where the desire is bubbling along underneath every exchange between, for example, Olivia and Cesario. And Olivia has to play this where she recognizes that she shouldn't really be seducing the servant, for example. In fact, there is a point where she asks him, "What is your parentage?" Which is the point where she's really become interested and thinks, "Oh, wait a minute, is he of suitable rank? Could this go somewhere?" And that brought to me another one of the themes of the play, which we might add to sex as one of the common elements of a great play, which is class. And there are several references to the relative position of characters in the social hierarchy, for example. And Malvolio, of course, his journey is very much about his aspirations to rise up in society. Is that not right?
Oh, that's absolutely right. And I'm pleased you picked up that question that Olivia asks of Cesario in their first meeting, where she says, "What is your parentage?" And Cesario says, "Well, I'm not in a great state right now, but I am a gentleman." And that's an important clarification. And there's a really interesting bit of modern stage business, which developed actually from Mark Rylance playing Olivia 4 years ago, because Olivia repeats that question after Viola is gone. And Mark was the first actor to turn that into a kind of moment of self-mortification. To be like, "Oh God, what a ridiculous question I just asked him. Can't believe I just said that," head in hands. And it's such a lovely piece of business because it's very funny, it's a brilliant moment. And lots of Olivias have done that subsequently. But actually, it is really important that Olivia discovers that this strange, attractive youth is, if not of nobleman level, is at least a gentleman. So that's something.
Yeah, it makes her pursuit viable.
It makes the pursuit viable. We're also told in the very first scene featuring Viola that she knows who Orsino is because she'd heard her father talk about him and also knew something about his marital status. She says, "Oh, he was a bachelor then."
So she's of that class.
She's of the class to know they inhabit the same world.
Now, Malvolio has pretensions above his station, doesn't he? He's dreaming of rising from steward to master as Olivia's husband, which is deluded.
Well, it's deluded, but he does give precedent for it. He talks about examples from his own world. And I would also point out that exactly the same match happens within Olivia's family and household, because Maria ends up marrying Sir Toby Belch. So Maria, as lady's gentlewoman, who is absolutely of a rank with the steward, marries her mistress's uncle.
I think, however, we see by the character Malvolio from the very beginning, and Olivia, the stature of her intelligence.
Oh, look, I'm not Team Malvolio on this one. I'm really not.
No, this is never going to happen.
But what I am saying is that the play doesn't let the characters off the hook for blaming him for his presumption, because his presumption is shown to be more nuanced than you might think of just by thinking, oh, the steward can't possibly think about the countess.
I think we feel pretty much that he deserves what he gets to some degree in terms of his pretension.
Well, I'm maybe Team Malvolio on that sense, because I think we're shown what happens when a sense of the right to punish goes crazy.
No, I don't disagree with that, and we'll come to that in terms of the balance. But his aspiration is out of line, and he lords it over the others as well. He says at one point, I'm not of your element. He thinks he's better than the rest.
I'm going to push back on this in terms of where the play wants us to put our sympathies.
Okay.
I mean, yes, look, Malvolio is a deeply unattractive person in terms of his own vanity and his self-importance. But that whole world, I mean, Belch is a fantastically unattractive character eventually, when he turns on his great friend, Sir Andrew Aguecheek,
yes,
when he himself is someone who was in a really serious drink spiral and behaving accordingly. There's so much there is wrong and flawed that actually Malvolio's flaws take on a slightly different tenor, because they're flaws of someone who is trying madly to hold stuff together while chaos reigns in this substantial and hard to run household. So yeah, I mean, he is like 100% an unlikable figure, but I think some of the strictness that he manifests is as much as anything someone trying to keep the house running on its even rails.
You're right. There are two sides to this. And in fact, as it unfolds, I think the balance of it changes. You mean we start with Malvolio. You described him earlier as a fun sponge. His name even suggests that he's the bad guy. He's puritanical and narcissistic. And Olivia nails that part of him. Oh, you are sick of self-love, Malvolio, she says. He's relentlessly self-righteous and snide to everyone with these vainglorious ideas above his station, as we've said, which predate his being suckered into thinking that Olivia actually has any desires on him. He openly aspires to being Count Malvolio, for example. And in fact, Pierce Quigley, who plays Malvolio in the current Globe production, said that he wasn't sure that Malvolio actually loved Olivia, that he was more interested in the advantage he may gain through marrying her. And there are a number of hints to that, I think. The gulling of him, therefore, and we'll come to Belch and the complications of him, initially is very funny. The conceit where he must continually smile at Olivia, in such contrast to his usual sourness, is brilliant comedy. But then it turns quite dark because Toby and Maria latch on to his delusion with the idea that they shall make him mad indeed, and they literally imprison him in a dark room and bind him and torment him. And that scene becomes pretty uncomfortable, doesn't it? It feels like the jape has gone too far.
We're told it is. The characters themselves, by the end of that scene, say, well, I wish this was done because this is awful. It's gaslighting, isn't it? You know, they say, let's have him in a dark room and bound. And he is then tormented and gaslit by Feste, who decides to approach him first in the guise of a crazy priest called Sir Topaz. Now, I'm always struck by that scene that although Feste as Topaz is trying to do a kind of day is night, night is day, he doesn't really fall for it. He really fights back. And there's this great moment where Malvolio says, look, ask me any question to prove my sanity. And thinking that he's picking the most abstruse question that no one's ever going to get, Feste says, what's the opinion of Pythagoras concerning birds? But actually,
he nails it.
He nails it. He gets it right. So I sort of feel like there's something in the play that's also saying he's relentless, he's rigorous, he's unfunny, he's narcissistic, he's ambitious, but his sanity is firm. And he's fighting back as someone who is unjustly imprisoned.
And you're right. I have some sympathy for him in the middle of the night coming down and telling off the rabble who are making tons of noise and drinking. He's like the adult.
Yeah.
And the children are out of control. The balance initially is that he's probably too puritanical.
Yeah.
And in a sense, there's this battle set up, isn't there, between him and Belch, who has been called the Lord of Misrule, which is a wonderful epithet, as is his name, by the way, Toby Belch, great name. And he's a sort of rebellious leader, isn't he?
So he's in that kind of Falstaffian vein. You know, we're familiar with this character type. Yes, Lord of Misrule, you know, absolutely a sort of figure of anarchic fun.
Which also actually was a real role in medieval festivals in England.
It was, and not just medieval. You have them in Inns of Court, in fact, have figures of the Lords of Misrule who take over They're not high status people.
No, they just temporarily become the sort of leader of the revelers.
Exactly.
And as I understand it, England at the time, there was a sort of shift in the cultural landscape since Henry VIII's rejection of Catholicism. The country was becoming more puritanical and conservative. And even there were laws discouraging festivals or drunkenness and improper behavior on Sundays and things. So this is kind of being played out between Belch and Malvolio. And I don't know where Shakespeare sides initially. We might be sympathetic to the revelers or not.
Well, look, this again is a sign of this man's genius in terms of writing ambivalence into everything he does. It would be completely easy for us to conclude that he's Team Belch and that it's all about cakes and ale, but he doesn't do that. He makes Belch's arc much more questionable, and he brings in a sympathy for Malvolio just when you think another writer might nail his advantage of having nabbed the Puritan. So he allows Malvolio to exit the play, which he does. He, leaves. And I think we're so used to this ending of this play that we forget how weird it is, that in the culminating moment of a comedy in Act 5, you're going to tie up loose knots and not worry about what comes later. We basically have Malvolio smash open the crash doors of the fire exit and go, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore, and just leaving. He does a version of that at the very end of Much Ado About Nothing, where the villain, Don John the Bastard, has left. And Benedict says, oh no, we'll catch him and I'll devise tortures for him. Ha 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 ha, let's dance. And you're still thinking, this is very odd, but it's quite a kind of dashed off threat. And I think Shakespeare is taking that idea of that ending and really making us see it and go, no, this person has been destroyed by this. He's lost his life and his meaning and his status and his job, and he's left. And Olivia does say, someone run after and make him relent. So maybe there is a future for Malvolio.
Well, I want to come to that specific exit and ending. I love your metaphor of him crashing through the fire doors. But coming back to Belch and the balance of it, as you say, you're quite right that actually Belch is not just a master of fun. There's a hard edge to him. Again, like Falstaff to some degree, who is not completely benign. He's very selfish and manipulative to Aguecheek, for example. He puts him up to this duel with Cesario, and all the time he's been stringing him along. Aguecheek has a suit for Olivia, which is going nowhere, and Belch just fleeces him for his money. He's taking him to the cleaners. And also, he turns on him really viciously, finally. And, of course, there's the cruelty to Malvolio. So, yeah, it's not simple, is it?
And I would say Shakespeare is a playwright who thinks about the actors he's got in his company, and he thinks about the units of relationship that work really well in his plays, and he repeats them. And I think what we see in Belch and Sir Andrew Aguecheek is more or less exactly the same relationship as Iago and Roderigo in Othello. It's the same line. Both Roderigo and Aguecheek have desires for one of the chief female characters, which are fed, the delusion is fed by the Belch Iago figure, and also the Belch Iago figure is taking money constantly. And in both cases, the exploiter turns on the exploited. Iago kills Roderigo, Belch just strikes Aguecheek, but it's the same arc. So I think if we're thinking about who Belch is, yes, he's a Lord of Misrule, but he's also the kind of malevolent dark heart of the play. He's not the same character as Iago, but there are overlaps in terms of character type and in terms of heritage for what that character is that I think we're supposed to see.
Can we talk about Feste, the fool? He's a fascinating character. He both engages in the action and also to some degree stands aloof, as Shakespearean fools do. He observes and comments on their behavior. And he, again, as Shakespearean fools seem to do, has a license to speak truth as long as it's couched in comic form. He doesn't really have an assured place in social hierarchy. He always has to earn the favor of his master, which may be fickle, which he does literally in this play. He has to re-earn the trust of Olivia, I think, at one moment. And also his sardonic view is one of the primary sources of the sense of melancholy that underlies the comedy in the play. As with Shakespeare's fools, they're not just funny.
Feste is such a great character, isn't he? He's understood to be written for and potentially partially the creation of the actor Robert Armin, who joined as Shakespeare's company's fool a year or so before the play was written, who was in many ways a much more literary, intellectual fool. Armin also plays the fool in Lear, and there are some interesting overlaps in terms of language and role with those two parts. Feste, a bit like the fool in Lear, seems to know stuff that not everyone knows. So Feste is the only character in the play who gets close to identifying Cesario's, if not secret, then at least picking up a few signs that maybe not all is as it seems. No one else seems in any way suspicious that Cesario is anything but Cesario, and it's Feste who kind of goes, maybe something's going on there.
He moves between the houses as well, and he has, like the other fools, a wisdom. As Viola says, this fellow is wise enough to play the fool. I think he describes himself as a dallier with words, so he can manipulate words.
Corrupter of words, yeah.
So that language becomes malleable and truth is a bit malleable, but it's wise words a lot of the time.
And that corrupter of words is interesting because a couple of years later, Shakespeare will get great play out of the word equivocator in Macbeth, in the Scottish play. And that idea of Feste being someone who not only goes between houses and Orsino and Olivia, slightly between genres and forms. He's both a comic figure, but also a shrewd, rather melancholic one. He's also the only person who can reach into Olivia's grief and help her. So the first scene between Feste and Olivia, which in a sense sets up the antagonism between Malvolio and Feste, also shows that Feste is able to take risks with Olivia to help her see that her grief is perhaps not doing her any favours. There's a moment where Feste asks Olivia, why mournest thou? And she says, good fool, for my brother's death. And he says, I think his soul is in hell. Quite a risky thing to say to your mistress. And Olivia says, fool, I know his soul is in heaven.
Then why would you mourn if he's in heaven?
Yeah, exactly. That's not him being smart, that's him being kind.
Yes, it was interesting that Jos Van Tuyler, who plays him at the Globe, said a nice thing, that to him, Feste really loves Olivia, although they hardly have any time together in the play. And of course, there is affection between fools and other masters in Shakespeare as well. And he also represents, as you've just touched on, this combination of the comic and the melancholic. And we've talked about the uncertain tone of the play. And I wanted to ask you about a specific theme that I think is intrinsic in the play that might be summarized as nothing is as it seems. Or as Feste says at one point, nothing that is so, which of course starts with Viola's disguise. But there are also many references to characters not being able to trust their eyes or appearances. And of course we have the twins. And when they appear, people cannot believe that one or other is not an apparition. But perhaps it comes back to the question of identity more profoundly. Their external experience disguises conflicting underlying desires, for example, or that they're not what they even think they are themselves. They are not only one thing. Viola says to Olivia that you do think you are not what you are. These kind of phrases just jumped out at me that suggests that theme, I think, throughout.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. And that, in a sense, brings us full circle with the subtitle, doesn't it, in terms of what you will. I would say if there is one thing that the play is asking, it's asking, what does it mean that all of our sense of self and identity, or indeed all of society, is based off relationships between people? What does that mean? That our sense of self can only really be determined or defined by relationships to other people's statuses. I think the play is really interested in that and really interested in what life actually is. And sometimes in the play that comes out in ironic or potentially quite trite form, particularly with Belch and Andrew Aguecheek, who are given slightly cod philosophical dialogue. There's a wonderful point where Aguecheek says that he thinks life consists of eating and drinking. And you kind of go, well, you're not wrong, actually. I mean, it kind of does. But in a more fundamental way, it also consists of the forms of social relationship through which those things happen that give our lives meaning. And I think that idea of who are you, who do you deserve, who do you want, who do you play, who are you really, all of those things are to play for, are up for grabs in Twelfth Night.
So it's personally, emotionally, sexually, and socially?
All of the above, yeah.
I wanted to just change tack slightly and ask you about the music and the role that music and song plays in the play, because there is a lot of it. 7 songs, I think, at count, more than any other Shakespeare play. So why and what is the music doing in this play?
It's a great question. Armin, as a clown figure, is also a singer, so his own gifts seem to be called on. There's a strange, slightly unexplained story with song in Twelfth Night, and we have a lingering sense from the second scene where we're introduced to Viola, who says, I'll dress as a eunuch because I'm a really good singer, and I'll go and offer myself as a singer to Orsino.
We never see her sing.
Do we hear Viola sing? No. That gets immediately forgotten. Look, the play is written in 1602, late 1601. It's not published till 1623. The nature of how the manuscript changes over 20 years is unknown. It's completely possible that in an earlier version of this play, the actor playing Viola was a really gifted singer, and there were songs for Viola in the play that get removed later.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think for the most part in the text that we have, Feste.
Feste does all the songs.
So what is the music doing in terms of theme and mood through the play?
We're given that in the first line, aren't we? If music be the food of love, play on. There's a lyricism to this play, which is both language, lyrical language. You know, one of my favourite speeches in Shakespeare is Viola's speech to Olivia, where Olivia gives Viola free rein.
To woo her.
To woo her. Well, what would you do? You know, how would you woo me? And she has this beautiful speech about building a willow cabin at her gate. It's just exquisite. So there's lyricism in the language. And that lyricism has a close relationship to music. It was understood at the time, and of course we understand it too, that they work in harmony and concert. So I think it's Shakespeare recognizing that his theatrical form is one that really allows him to lean in both to lyrical poetry and into musical lyricism to create mood, which is what all of those songs are doing. And we're told they're doing that, but Orsino comes out and says, I'm in quite a kind of soppy mood. Let's get Feste in to sing a soppy song. You know, the whole thing is we're advised as to what these songs should do before we hear them.
Yeah, Orsino is wallowing in romantic longing and he wants a soppy song. He asks Viola what she thinks of the music at that moment. She says, it gives the very echo to the seat where love is throned. That's a great line because in this case, it's her love. She's talking about hidden love, of course. So it reflects the depths of her feelings for him at that moment as well. I think the lyrics of Feste songs are often also an ironic commentary, aren't they, on what is happening? He mocks Orsino's self-importance, melancholy, for example, I think a bit in the song about the hopeless lover wishing for death.
Yeah.
And of course, the play ends with a song from Feste on his own, which brings us neatly to the end. And I wanted to ask you about where we get to with the ending. Inevitably, I guess the revelry of whatever festival this is, if it is, comes to an end. Normal order is restored.
Whatever that is.
Well, let's come back to that. With a classic resolution for comedy, on the surface, the multiple marriages, 3 in total. And there's the prospect of consummation of the desires between these couples that have been barely contained throughout. Now, Olivia has won her man, and he is really a man, whether they've had it yet or not. She now has him. And Orsino is able to fully express his attraction to Cesario now. But I was also going to say, but it doesn't end happily for all. And I want to come back to the couples in a minute. But you talked about Malvolio and where he ends up, obviously being grossly mistreated. And his last line, as he exits through those fire doors, he shouts, I will be revenged on the whole pack of you. It's not over for him, it seems.
It's not, no. I mean, Shakespeare's plays have, generated many takes and fan fiction versions and sequels and things like that. So, I'm sure many people have had their say about what happens next to Malvolio. I think it's important that we hear his words. The whole pack of you is such a powerful phrase.
Isn't it?
A pack of animals, a pack of dogs. He feels like he's been baited, like a bear or a bull. So he's really calling out what he sees his experience to have been.
So in the Globe Productions, Pierce does something interesting I realized when I read the text afterwards. He says why very plaintively a number of times. The text actually doesn't have that multiple whys.
No, it doesn't.
And it really enhances or ratchets up the anguish and the questioning that Malvolio is throwing back at them. Why so cruel? Why would you do this to anyone? It was poignant, and you could feel the audience going out to him.
Well, also, you confront the fact that you've also laughed at him as an audience.
Yes, I was going to say to you that when he says, I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you, A really interesting reading I read was that might also include us in the audience, because we have been complicit in his mistreatment in the sense that we have laughed at him as well, and perhaps now share in some sort of uneasy guilt at doing so, which adds to this overall sense of uncertainty about the tone and ending of the play, we feel, I think.
I completely agree, although I think I probably wouldn't call it uncertainty. I think I would just call it a sort of humane mix, that kind of sense that with great joy, there is also ambivalence. I would say that the Mariah Belch marriage is certainly ambivalent in the sense that where does that leave Mariah? Is she still in Olivia's employ? Very unclear. Or outright misery, whether we're talking about Malvolio or potentially even Antonio, whose ending might be ambivalent, may be happy, may also be unhappy. We don't know what happens to him in the shuffling of couples at the end.
No, he is. I was going to ask you about him. He is sort of left out in some way. We don't know what his future is. There's something happening with his position. I mean, he's been arrested and all of that. But more importantly, I think, emotionally, what has happened to Sebastian and where Sebastian goes next and where he goes in relation to Sebastian. I mean, he's devoted to Sebastian, and there is some reciprocity in that. And therefore, I was going to ask you again, maybe as you raised earlier, there's some question as to how secure the relationships of the couples are. I mean, is this a happy ever after thing?
I think we shouldn't be deluded by the kind of sitcom expectations of what a romantic comedy are. We should also recognise the capaciousness of Olivia's household. Olivia, as a major landowner, lives her life in public. There are lots of people in her employ and in her household around her. It doesn't automatically mean Antonio gets kicked out and that he ends the play friendless. There's a world in which he stays, actually, in the orbit of Sebastian and Olivia.
Which you think could continue a relationship with Sebastian, potentially?
I'm leaving it open to possibility.
Okay.
Another play by Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice, has another character called Antonio, who ends as the sort of third wheel in a relationship between a man and a woman. I would say there is kind of room there where there's space for the groom's bosom buddy / lover in a slightly more open-minded marriage.
I know we're supposed to just accept for dramatic convention the way these plays end and are wrapped up and these couples come together, and set aside perhaps some of the qualms we might have. For example, Sebastian has known Olivia for all of 10 minutes and vice versa in reality before they got married. Orsino has quite quickly given up his declared love for Olivia and chosen, a person he knows is someone else and has been lying to him the whole time. And actually, he was prepared to kill not that long previously. We've skipped over that moment of horror almost, where in his rage at being refused by Olivia, he threatens to kill Cesario so that she won't have him.
Which Viola allegedly consents to as well.
Yes. So, I guess what we're saying is this is, what did you say? A humane mix. It's an ambiguous mix, both comic and melancholic. And in fact, we come back to Feste's song at the end. His view of the future is probably less sanguine. He's the one we're left with, and he sings this song of a tale of a jester's life with a refrain that it raineth every day. I was very interested that you mentioned that connection between Feste here and the Fool in Lear, because there is an overlap, isn't there, in that language, because the Fool in Lear sings virtually the same lines. So in a surprisingly similar existential ennui there at the end. Anyway, Will, thank you so much for all your time and expertise on this wonderful play.
Pleasure.
Now, before I let you go, one of the traditions of the podcast, I like to ask my guests to recommend another play that we might cover on the podcast, or one that's just a personal favorite. I don't know whether you're allowed to not name Shakespeare, but I would say you're allowed to not name Shakespeare, or you are allowed to name Shakespeare, up to you. But have you a play that you love that you could share with our listeners?
Well, that is a very good question. I have to say, Twelfth Night is probably my favourite Shakespeare play. I've loved it for a very long time. I also very much love Cymbeline. I think it's a fabulous play. In some senses, rather like Twelfth Night, and some of its themes and some of its characters. As far as other plays go, I think probably the play that got me hooked on early modern drama is a play by Nicholas Wright called Cressida. Not Troilus and Cressida, which is on at the Globe in a few weeks' time, but just Cressida. And it's about Shakespeare's theatre company in the early 17th century. And it doesn't include Shakespeare. It's about the era after him. It's a backstage drama in the world of 1620s, 30s king's men. And it's absolutely brilliant. And it captures that strange professional world where adolescents and young men play women. It asks what happens to those individuals as they grow out of their roles. It asks how the industry accommodated itself to essentially exploiting fairly young children in performance. It's a wonderful play by a very brilliant modern dramatist. So I would say Nicholas Wright's Cressida is my recommendation.
So it's about the theatre.
It's about the theatre.
Thank you for that. I will seek that out. Right. So thank you so much, Will. Twelfth Night, or What You Will, continues at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre until the 25th of October, 2025. And you will have another chance to see the play in London when the RSC's recent production comes to the Barbican from October through to January 2026. So, as the curtain falls on the happy couples, we may leave the theatre with the comic assurance that all is well with the world. But we may also wonder at the misdirected desires that engulfed these lovers before their fates were properly settled, or be slightly disquieted by the unresolved fortunes of Malvolio and Antonio. Certainly the melancholic strain of Feste's farewell song, with his forecast of rain, leaves a cloud of sorts over the festive mood. Oh well, make of it what you will. Thanks for listening. See you next time. There are additional footnotes about this and every other play that we cover in the podcast available to our patrons. Patrons also enjoy early access to our sister podcast, The Play Review, in which Jody Rylett and I share our views on current productions on the London stage. To become a patron, please visit our website at theplaypodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts so as not to miss an episode. Thank you again for listening. See you next time.